Hey guys, I'm Sam, that's the Sun Eater, and this is a YouTube channel where we look at how to use batteries and solar to add range and life onto an old EV. Today's video is going to be all about solar roof racks and the methods we can use to attach solar panels to the roof of our car in such a way that they will stay there even under adverse conditions like windstorms or when you're driving down the freeway at 70 miles an hour. It's going to be a very kind of nuts and bolts episode that focuses specifically on the methods of attachment and what I've learned now from building two of these works and doesn't work. But before we get into that, let's take a quick look at the update on the car and see how it's done since the last video. Okay, we're at 51,304 miles. That's 6,229 miles since I've bought the vehicle. That's 124 round-trip commutes. I have a 50-mile commute to my job and back. That's the equivalent of what would have been 444 gallons of gas in my old vehicle. Which would have cost around $1,110. Throw in an oil change and we're up to about $1,140 in savings since I started driving electric. So I've still got a ways to go before the vehicle pays for itself, but I'm a little over a third of the way there. I am down to 6 battery bars in the Leaf. On my Patreon page, I track the degradation of the battery of the Leaf versus miles driven on a little chart. So if you're considering buying a Leaf in a hot climate, you can look at that graph and get an idea of what kind of degradation per mile you can expect. All of our components have been holding up really well too. The inverter, the charge controller, the air conditioning unit, nothing's given me any problems over the last, I think I've been running with all these components for almost a year now, and everything's been holding up great, so I think we've got some pretty good parts picked out for this project. Now onto the roof rack. Those of you guys who have been watching the channel for a while will remember that the first attempt that I made at this I wasn't very happy with. I made several mistakes, so I'm going to take a real quick look right now at what those were, what parts of the system of the first attempt worked well, and what mistakes specifically I made. Now, for simplification, the first time that I tried to put solar panels on a roof rack, my plan was to just put the slides directly onto the roof rack, attach the panel to the slide, and it would be a real simple thing. The problem is that these roof racks are designed to attach to a very specific part of the vehicle. When you pull these out of the box, they've got plans with them that will tell you almost down to the inch how far to space it out from that center column right there. So the problem with my plan to completely assemble the roof rack, solar panel and all, and then set it on top of the vehicle is that it had these attachment brackets resting in parts of the vehicle where the manufacturer didn't intend them to set, so they didn't grip real well onto the frame of the vehicle. Now I fixed this kind of by just putting these little parts in my vise and hammering at them and kind of eyeballing it until I could get the curvature of this to kind of match the curvature of the vehicle, and it's in the new place it was resting on the frame. That's a bad idea. This tiny little lip right here, this little 3/4 of an inch lip, is the main anchor point. That secures this entire assembly to the vehicle. Just the kind of pressure against the frame of the vehicle right there is the only thing that keeps this giant sail from blowing off in the freeway when you get doing 70 miles an hour. And it is vital that this rests pretty much exactly where the manufacturer intended it to rest. So we don't get to assemble our full roof rack and then go back and kind of set it on the car we want to. We have to put these where they're supposed to go and then build from there and figure out how we're going to attach our solar panels to the roof rack once it's in the location where it pretty much has to sit. So that was my first mistake, is attaching the slides directly to the roof rack. The second mistake I made was trying to put the entire slide assembly on a hinge. My thought process was that if I parked in a crowded parking lot, I could extend the panels and then lift them up so that they wouldn't hang so far out from the side of the car and potentially be a nuisance or an obstacle to other people who are parking the vehicle close to me. The problem with these hinges is A, once you extend that solar panel all the way out, it actually puts a lot of torque on any hinge you put right there. And B, you're having to drill even more holes through your roof rack or whatever piece of metal you have here to assemble it to get the hinge to stay locked on there. So if you look, actually, that introduced a whole lot of play into this whole assembly. And I'm kind of surprised, honestly, that this thing made, you know, 5,000 miles worth of trips up and down the freeway at 60 miles an hour. It's the hinge, I think, adds a failure point to the whole system. It's not really necessary, and I would advise you to just skip it and go with a straight slide and just park in a corner of the parking lot where there's not going to be a whole lot of other people if you're parking this and letting it charge all day. Okay, so we've covered that the roof rack has to sit where the manufacturer wants it to sit. The hinges introduce a weak point. The third mistake that I made was the selection of sub-ideal bolts for this project. Initially I went with these number 8 by 32, looks like 1 3/8 inch screws, and they were okay. I mean, it was pretty easy to drill the little holes through the aluminum and get these screws to fit through the grommets. The problem, I think, the reason I consider this bolt a poor selection is because it leaves so much extra space, kind of playroom inside that grommet. We're not using the largest bolt that we can that fits through there. So let's take a look at specifically how my first system failed. What was the day that it broke on? Okay, so the springtime windstorm that broke the old system initially blew against the panel with enough force to shear that smaller bolt that I was using formerly and rip the panel through the washer. Notice how small the washer is underneath that nut there. We'll talk more about that later. And in addition to ripping the panel through the washer and shearing that bolt, you'll see that there is a Turnabond tape underneath of there that I use to secure the panel to that little metal 90 right there and just give it a little more support. So it ripped the panel through the washer, sheared the bolt, and peeled it away from that Turnabond simultaneously. The reason the wind was able to blow against the panel with such force to begin with was that little friction hinge that I had in the old system wasn't able to hold the panel horizontal. The wind basically blew the entire assembly upright like a fin sticking straight up out of the car there, and that exposed the panel to being blown at directly horizontally, as opposed to normally it cuts through the wind, you know, like a knife. This way it was oriented directly into the wind, and the full force of that 50-mile-an-hour gust was able to do all that damage. So, building the new system, we're going to keep in mind that we need thicker bolts, wider washers, and hinges that will not allow that assembly to blow upright in the event of a heavy windstorm. One piece of good news that I did get from the first iteration of the system is that these locking hinges that are designed for like sliding drawers inside, I had some concern that they would, the internals of them would rust and not work real well, but you can see these ball bearings here, even after a full year outside, still have virtually no rust on them. All the locking mechanisms still work. So when you're building your sliding roof rack, just give it a hefty coating of grease, and that should help the internals of your slide stay rust free even in wet environments for years. Okay, so we've covered that the roof rack has to go onto the vehicle in the manufacturer specified location. We know how to attach the panel to the slides using the thickest bolts and washers, but how do we put the bracketing assembly on the car? Well, I always use a 90, a metal that has a built-in 90 into it, because that's going to give you a lot more strength against flexing. You can get these bars at any hardware store. I cut out the semicircle shape of the roof rack bars out of my metal 90 there, so that it rests right on top of this roof rack, and then you just drop a bolt down straight through there, and that gets it on there very securely. But the problem is, after you cut that little semicircle out, your 90 loses that strength against flexing it has. So how I reinforced it was with just a straight aluminum bar. I ran 4 screws, 4 bolts through the side of it and bolted it on, and that restored the structural integrity of that 90, so that now we've got 2 main bars that go down the length of the vehicle that are very structurally sound against flexing, and they're bolted to the roof rack using some very heavy-duty bolts. Now, how far out do we space these secondary supports that go on the roof rack? Well, if you put them too close toward the middle of the car, then when you fold your panels all the way out, you're not going to have as much support, and it's that middle bar is going to flex up a whole lot. But if you put them too far out, then when you fold your panels in, you're going to have the exact same problem. So the spacing that I calculated works best is about 2/3 of the way out from the center of where your panels are going to be. That's going to be different for everybody, because everybody's going to use different size panels for this. You could use 100 watt, 200 watt. These are about 175 watt panels that I've got on there, but you could probably even go up to like 250 on larger vehicles like NV 200 or Hyundai Kona. So exactly how far 2/3 is will change with every vehicle, but you want to keep them about 2/3 of the way out. Okay, once you've got your secondary supports locked on, bolted onto your roof rack and reinforced, then you're going to put your 2, I'm using steel for my crossbar just because it's a very structurally sound material, and you'll measure out how wide your panels are, cut your bar that wide, and just bolt it right onto your metal 90 here. Now, as far as how long your bar needs to be, once again, that depends on what size panels you're using, but this is very important. You don't want to mess this one up. When you're measuring how far forward or backward on the vehicle you want this primary support to go, make sure that you open your hatchback first. The last thing you want to happen is for you to spend all day bolting all this together and then open your hatchback and realize it won't open because you've set your assembly too far back. So don't forget about that. One last note. You will notice that I have a secondary metal bar inserted right here. That is for additional structural integrity. When I fold these big panels all the way out, you can see how much flex is on that steel bar there. That's no bueno. But when we come and put another bar right here, and how I'm going to do that is just drill 2 more holes, take these nuts off the bottom, slap that piece right under there. You can see that with that extra bar in there, it doesn't flex nearly as much. If you're using bigger, heavier panels and you want these to fold out further, just double or triple stack your securing metal rods right there in the middle, and that'll keep your whole assembly from flexing like bird wings when you fold these things all the way out and hang this weight all the way out here away from that center point. Another note, steel is a great material to use for your crossbars. It's a lot stronger than aluminum, but make sure you paint it. I did not paint my steel before I put it on there, and now it's really starting to rust. You can see some of the rust dripping down on the solar panel right there. So now I'm gonna have to wait for this thing to dry out. It rained a little bit today, and go back and paint that bar with it on the assembly. That's gonna be a pain in the butt. So make sure you spray paint your steel before you drill your holes and bolt it onto your roof rack assembly. Okay, so I finished up with the new roof rack build last weekend. We had a nice sunny week. I drove the car every day to work, and I was really looking forward to setting some new solar records. You guys that have been watching the channel for a while know we've been going from like 2.8 to 3 to 3.2, 3.25 is right around the record that we've set so far for the most solar power we've been able to get out of the car in a day. And I finished with this build, and the numbers came in on the first sunny day. Ran out and checked the charge controller, and it only gave a reading of 2.8 kilowatt hours for the day. Even though, you know, it's been 3 weeks since I had the full roof rack functional. The days have gotten a lot longer, the sunlight more direct. I should have blown it out of the water. So what was happening that was causing the new roof rack to not put as much power out as the former roof rack? Well, my first design had one advantage over the new design, and that's that these roof rack, the primary roof racks, which were connected directly to the slides, were spaced out so far that they left these 100-watt panels completely uncovered. Now, it's pretty cloudy today, but even under mostly cloudy skies, you can see the shading from those support brackets very clearly against these panels. So I unplugged those 100-watt panels, watched how unplugging them affected the power income on the charge controller in the setup in the back, and sure enough, when I unplugged the 100-watt panel, the power only dropped by about 20 or 30 watts. And I'm like, man, that must be what it is. I would not have thought that just those skinny little bands of shading in there would have decreased the output of those two panels by almost 50%, but that certainly seems to be what they're doing. They actually make a watt meter. You guys remember this little guy? We used him to tell us the capacity of our Leaf battery modules. Well, they make a watt meter that looks like this, only on the end of it, it's got those little MC4 connectors that are at the end of the solar panels. And if you've got a little DIY solar system like this, and you just feel like it should be giving you more power than it is, you can hook this thing up to your solar panels individually, let them run for a couple hours, and this thing will tell you exactly how much power it's putting out, and it'll help you identify which one of your solar panels in your setup is the weak link, if it has something wrong with it, if it's defective, if it's not putting out as much power as it should be. The watt meter with the MC4 connectors at the end will really help you identify exactly which one of your panels is the culprit and why your system as a whole is underperforming. And I need to get one of those so that in situations like this, I can identify exactly how much one of my panels is failing me, instead of just unplugging that panel and looking at the charge controller and kind of guess and checking. A watt meter with the MC4 connectors would help me put a real precise number to that. So, how am I going to fix this problem? We've got to have our support brackets there for this new and improved roof rack, but we can't lose all the power on our 200 watts of paneling down there from all the shading. Well, it occurred to me that now that we've got all this hardware there, we've got the perfect base that we could lift those 200 watt panels up off the hood and actually attach them onto this structure without too much trouble at all. These panels here are lifted because they're on those big, fat, heavy-duty hinges right there, and so they could slide back over those 100 watt panels even if they were installed on the brackets there. That would give us airflow underneath these panels here. It would lift them above the bracket so that we don't have all that shading, and both of those things combined are going to make them a lot more efficient and help us continue to push the record of how much solar power we've been able to get out of our Leaf charging station. So that's where I'm at now. I've got a take those two 100-watt panels on the roof, lift them up onto those support brackets, bolt them down there. But once I get done with that, I will be on Roof Rack version 3.0, and I really feel like that's going to help us set some great records. Solar panels are a lot more efficient when they stay a little cooler, and I know taped to the top of the car like that, they get very warm, and it's basically like a heater right on top of the car too. I'm sure a lot of that heat radiates downward into the vehicle. By lifting it up off there, not only will we make the panel more efficient, but we're also shading the entire vehicle underneath of it too, which is going to help keep the interior a little cooler, and our air conditioner inside the car won't have to work as hard to pump all that heat out of the vehicle. So I think once I finish that up in the next week or two, we're really definitely going to have the best system by far that we've built to date. So that's all I got for the roof rack builds tutorial. I hope that I described it in a general enough sense that you can see how this system could be used not just to build a solar roof rack on the Leaf, but on any vehicle that you can put a roof rack on, from a smart car to a Renault Zoe, a Hyundai Kona, the Nissan ENV 200. The same general steps can be followed to build a solar roof rack on any electric vehicle, or really any vehicle in general. Van life is a new kind of lifestyle that's kind of taking off in the States as more and more people get tired of the financial burden of owning a home, which is the price is just increasing so fast that it's outpacing people's income. And a lot of people will say, well, I'll just live in a van for 4 or 5 years, save up all my income, and then have enough for a down payment on a house or to retire early. But the problem with living in your vehicle is climate control and how much power it takes. So I could definitely see a solar roof rack being used on an ICE vehicle that somebody's living in to provide them a power supply for climate control. So that's all the information I have to share on solar roof racks. I know it's a very niche topic. It really only applies to people who are actively building one of these charging stations. To the casual viewer who just watches these episodes for entertainment and isn't actively building a solar powered charging station, today's episode wasn't really relevant or probably interesting. A little boring. I don't expect to get a whole lot of clicks, but it is the tutorial that I needed when I first started to keep me from making all these kind of expensive mistakes that I've been making and having to go back through and tweak this and correct that. And that was really my motivation from the beginning for starting this YouTube channel, is creating a tutorial for other people to do this that'll help them steer them around the mistakes that I've made. And I know that I'm not the first person to do this. There have been dozens of people before me who have made solar powered charging stations, but none of them ever left a guide to how to do it. That's what I'm trying to do with this YouTube channel, and that's why you will see from time to time very specific episodes like this one, because it is a tutorial. That's what I'm trying to make it. You also might think, well man, it seems like a lot of bolting and measuring and cutting for the solar roof rack. Maybe I'll stick to just Eterna bonding the panels to the vehicle. That way, how much extra power am I actually getting from the roof rack? Well, consider this. That's a 50-watt panel, and the two on top of the car are 100 watts, so that gives us 250 altogether. The two on the roof rack are 175, so that gets us up to 350 watts from the roof rack. That's well over what we can get from just taping panels to the car. You're going to have, the roof rack gives you the opportunity to more than double the solar power that you can get from your vehicle. And that's why it's an option that for pretty much anybody that's doing this, the roof rack, especially the roof rack with the slides, is going to be irresistible. Alright, that's it for today's episode. Let's take a look at the economy V's of the week. So I had a viewer in the comments section of my last video tell me about how he has seen some Chevy Bolts going for just around $14,000. He made a good point about how the batteries hold up well, and so I ran a search on Auto Tempest, and sure enough, we've got 2 Bolts in Cali for just $14,500. The winner of Economy V of the Week status is this 2019 Bolt with 95,000 miles on it. The interior and exterior are both in great shape, and the range-o-meter shows a maximum range of about 168 miles. But I bet you can stretch that to 180 by driving a little slower and going easy on the climate control. It's a darn good deal. I bet you can put another 200,000 miles on this before the range gets down to 50 or 60 or 70 miles, and then you can just put a solar charging station on it and keep right on going. My second economy EV of the week I found on eBay, and it's not a deal on a vehicle, but a deal on solar panels. These 320 watt panels are going for only 120 bucks. To put that in perspective, I paid 3 times that much for the 2 panels on the roof rack of the Sun Eater that add up to about 350 watts, a comparable wattage. This one panel would make around 1.3 kilowatt hours of power per day and be perfect for a roof rack. But can we trust this Santan Solar guy? Well, I went on the DIY Solar Forum, a website that was started by another solar YouTuber, and actually found a thread entitled, "Anyone Buy Used Solar Panels from eBay?" Lots of people have. They left their reviews of the various sellers on the thread, and sure enough, Santan Solar is on there several times with great reviews. So when it comes time to buy your solar panels for your electric vehicle charging station, make sure to check out eBay and run the seller's credentials on the DIY Solar Forum. It's really a great resource. Alright, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for watching, supporting the channel. I hope you didn't find the video today too boring, and an extra special thank you to my Patreon patrons who helped me fund this. 100% of the donations on my Patreon site go directly towards solar car research. I'll see you guys next week.